There is a silence a child makes that is different from any other silence in the world, and on the night it finally broke. It broke in a sick room full of people who had spent 3 years calling it grief. The Alpha King lay grey and failing in the great bed, thin as a man twice his age, and the whole household had gathered to watch their king waste away from a sorrow no healer could mend. His physician sat at the bedside with a cup in her gentle hands, the same cup she had brought him every night for 3 years. And in the doorway, small and barefoot and trembling, stood a boy who had not spoken a single word to another living soul in 3 years. His son, the silent prince, looking at that cup with a terror far too old for his face. I stood behind him with my hand on his small shoulder, because I was the only person in that palace he would let touch him, and I felt him gather 3 years of swallowed words into his chest like a breath before a dive. He opened his mouth, and the word he had been holding since the night his mother died was going to either save his father's life or cost us both ours. You cannot understand that sick room until you understand the 3 years before it, and the boy, and the drawings, and a night maid no one ever thought to mention to the king. So let me go back to the beginning, which for me was simply another night shift, and a small voice in the dark that I had no idea I was the only one who heard. His son had been silent for 3 years. I had been listening to him every night, and I never once thought it was strange, because I had spent my whole life being the person no one thought to tell things to. My name was Vesna, and I worked the night shift in the Palace of the Iron Reach, which is the shift you give to the people you would rather not see. I cleaned the grates and laid the morning fires and carried away what the day had finished with, moving through the great dark halls while the household slept, and in 4 years no one above the rank of under-steward had ever learned my name, which suited me. I had been an orphan and then a servant, and I had raised 3 younger ones in a cold cottage before the fever took them from me too, and I had come out the other side of all that loss, as a quiet person who knew how to be in a room with grief without needing to fix it. That turns out to be a rare skill. I did not know how rare until it gave a king back his son. The Alpha King's name was Halvar, and his palace was a house in mourning, though no one called it that anymore, because after 3 years mourning simply becomes the weather. His Luna had died 3 years before. The Lady Leora, a bright foreign-born queen the whole realm had loved, taken by a sudden fever in the space of a single night, and the king had never recovered. He had not remarried. He had buried himself in the cold work of ruling and let the warmth go out of the place, and worst of all, he had lost his son in the same season he lost his wife, because the little prince, 2 years old and motherless, had stopped speaking the week she died, and had not said a word to anyone since. They had tried everything on the boy. Healers, tutors, the king's own grim and grieving attempts. Royal physicians had pronounced him broken by sorrow, his silence a wound that might never close. He was 6 now, a solemn dark-eyed child who moved through the palace like a small ghost, and the household had long since folded his silence into the general grief and stopped expecting anything else. What no one knew, what no one thought to ask, because who asks the night made anything, was that the silent prince was not silent. Not with me. It began the way the most important things in my life have always begun, which is to say by accident, and at an hour when no one important was watching. I was laying the fire in the small east nursery on one of my first nights, certain the child was asleep, when a voice came out of the dark of the bed, small, rusty, careful. The voice of someone using a thing he had not used in a long time. "You do it quiet," the boy said. "The day people are loud." I did not turn around fast. I had raised children. You do not lunge at a wild, soft thing that has decided to come to you. I kept laying the fire, and I said, "To the grate. The day people have a lot to do. I only have the fires and the floors. There is no hurry on a floor. A long silence. Then, will you tell them I talked? And I understood, in that moment, that this was the whole of it, that somewhere in this child was a reason that being heard was dangerous, and that the only way I would ever be trusted with the sound of his voice was to be the one person in the palace who wanted nothing from it. No, I said. Your words are yours. You can give them to whoever you like, and keep them from whoever you like. I will not give away a thing that belongs to you. He spoke to me every night after that. Not about anything, at first. About the day. About which tutor had a cold, and which dog had pups, and how he did not like the soup. The ordinary endless talk of a small boy, poured out in the dark to the one person who had promised never to make it mean anything. I learnt his whole self that way. On my knees by his fire, in the hours the palace slept, that he was clever and watchful and very lonely, that he missed his mother in a way he had no words for in daylight, that he had decided the day people were not safe to talk to, and had simply, at 2 years old, stopped. I never asked him why. That was the secret of it, I think. Everyone else in his life was a question he had to answer. I was the one person who only ever listened, and so I was the one he finally spoke to. There was a night that winter I have never forgotten, because it was the night I understood how much he had been carrying alone. He had a fever, a small ordinary child's fever, nothing like the thing that took his mother, and he was frightened of it in a way that did not match its size. And when I came in to bank the fire, I found him sitting bolt upright in the dark, rigid, refusing to lie back down. I asked him, gently, what was wrong, and he said, in the smallest voice I have ever heard a person use, "If I sleep, will someone come with a cup?" I did not understand the question then. I only understood the fear under it, which was enormous and very old, and so I did the only thing I knew. I told him I would sit by the fire all night and watch the door, and that nothing came through a door I was watching. He looked at me for a long moment, weighing it the way he weighed everything, deciding whether the nightmaid's word was worth anything. Then he lay down, and he slept, and I sat by that grate until dawn, keeping a promise I did not yet know I had made about the most dangerous thing in the palace. He never thanked me. He simply, after that night, began saving his hardest words for me, testing, I think, whether the woman who watched the door could be trusted with the things that came through it. And I never told anyone. Not because I was hiding it, I want to be clear about that, because it became a charge against me later, but because it never occurred to me that anyone would care what a child said to a nightmaid. I was the bottom of that household. No one had asked me a single thing in 4 years. The idea that the king himself might want to know that his son spoke to me in the dark would have struck me then as absurd. So the most important fact in the Palace of the Iron Reach sat unspoken for the better part of a year, in the gap between the people who knew things and the people no one thought to ask. It would have stayed there, maybe forever, if not for the drawings. The boy drew. It was the one thing he did in daylight that was wholly his, and the tutors let him because it kept him quiet, and the physician encouraged it as a harmless outlet for a grief-struck child. He drew constantly, and he gave the drawings to me, slid them under the nursery door, left them by the grate, pressed them into my hands at night, because I was the only one who looked at them instead of through them. And after I had known him some months, I began to notice that he drew the same thing, over and over, the way a person worries a wound. It was always a night scene. A figure in a bed, which I came to understand was his mother. A cup beside the bed, and a second figure standing over the cup. A tall figure, always drawn with the same careful detail he gave nothing else, and always, with something in its hand held over the cup. He drew it dozens of ways across those months, but it was always the same night. The same bed, the same cup, the same standing figure, doing the same small, terrible thing over it. A 6-year-old's hand drawing, again and again, the last thing a 2-year-old had seen. I am not clever the way the court is clever, but I had buried my own, and I knew what a haunting looks like. And slowly, with a cold that started in my stomach and spread, I began to understand what the silent prince had been telling me in the only language he dared. His mother had not died of a fever. His mother had died of a cup, and a figure standing over it in the night. And a 2-year-old had seen it, and had understood, in the wordless way the very young understand danger, that the safest thing a witness can do is never make a sound. For 3 years the household had called his silence grief. It was not grief. It was a child holding still in front of a thing that had killed his mother and might, if it noticed him, kill him too. And the figure in the drawings, tall, careful, holding something over the cup, wore, in every single one, the long plain dress and the little cap of the king's own physician. If you have ever held a piece of knowledge so dangerous that you understood, the moment you grasped it, that your life had just become smaller and shorter, if you have ever realized that you and a child are the only 2 people who know a thing the powerful would kill to keep buried, then you know the cold I carried out of that nursery, and you know it does not warm. I am going to tell you who the physician was, and what she had truly been doing in that palace for 3 years, and how a silent boy and a night maid came to hold the life of an alpha king in their hands. Stay with me to the sick room and the cup. The night the king found out, everything changed, exactly as the stories promised, but not before it nearly ended all 3 of us. The king's physician was a woman named Audra, and she was beloved, and that is the whole genius of what she did. She had served the Iron Reach for years. She had attended the Lady Leora in her final fever, and signed the record of her death. She had taken the grieving king under her care afterward, brought him the sleeping draughts and the strengthening cordials that a man wasting from sorrow needs, sat at his bedside through 3 years of decline, with the gentle patience the whole court praised. And she had been, the entire time, the most trusted figure in the boy's life too. The kind physician who managed his silence, who controlled which tutors saw him, and which healers were turned away, who pronounced again and again that the prince was broken by grief and must not be pressed, must not be questioned, must be left in her careful keeping. I understood it all at once, the way you understand a pattern when the last piece drops. Audra had not been failing to cure the boy's silence. She had been protecting it. A mute witness is a safe witness. She had spent 3 years as the one person standing between the silent child and anyone who might coax the truth out of him, and she had been so gentle about it, so wise and so patient, that the whole grieving palace thanked her for the prison she kept him in. And the Lady Leora had not been her first work, nor her last. I did not have all of it then, the king's men pieced the rest together after, but I had enough to see the shape of the thing. Audra was not the realm's loyal physician. She was an enemy faction's patient knife, placed at the heart of the Iron Reach years before. And her task had always been the slow unmaking of its king, and the bright, sharp, foreign-born Luna had caught her at it. Leora had figured out that her husband's beloved physician was poisoning him by inches, dressing a murder as a decline, and she had moved to expose her. So Audra had killed the Luna first, in a single night, with a cup and a fever only the physician herself could certify, before the Queen could say a word. And then she had simply continued. For 3 years she had gone on bringing the grieving king his nightly cordial, the strengthening draught the whole court was so grateful for, killing him exactly as slowly as she had always meant to, hidden now behind a sorrow so total that no one would ever look at a wasting widower and think to ask whether grief was really what was thinning his blood. The thing the whole palace called the king's grief was a murder still in progress, and the only two people who knew were a boy who would not speak and a maid no one would believe. This is the part where the quiet woman who had spent her life being overlooked had to do the most unquiet thing imaginable, and I will not pretend I was brave about it. I was terrified. I knew exactly what I was. A night maid with a stack of a child's drawings against the beloved royal physician in a court that had never once learned my name. If I went to anyone but the king, it would reach Audra by morning, and a maid and a child would have a sudden quiet accident, and the drawings would burn. My word weighed nothing. The boy's word weighed nothing, and worse, getting him to give it might cost him the silence that had kept him alive. But the king was dying. A little more every night, by a gentle hand, with a grateful court watching. And I had buried enough people I loved to know that there is a kind of silence that is not safety, but slow surrender, and that I had been keeping one too. Sitting on the most important truth in the palace, because I had decided, long ago, that no one would ever want to hear what I knew. So I stopped deciding that for them. I went to the king. It is not a simple thing for a night maid to reach an alpha king. I will spare you how I managed it. It involved his second, a hard, suspicious man named Einar, who very nearly had me thrown out, and who stopped only because I said one sentence that no one trying to harm the king would ever say, which was, "Your physician brings him a cup every night, and I can prove she has been bringing him the same cup she brought the Lady Leora." Einar went very still. A good soldier knows the sound of a thing that fits. They brought me to Halva, and I laid the drawings out across the table in front of the grieving, wasting king. 3 years of a silent boy drawing the same night, the same bed, the same cup, the same tall, careful figure in a physician's cap, holding something over it. I told him whose voice had been describing those drawings to me in the dark for the better part of a year. I told him his son was not broken. His son was a witness, and had been a witness for 3 years, and had been kept silent and close by the very woman who had given him something to witness. I watched a man come back from the dead to hear it. The grief that had hung on Halva for 3 years did not lift gently, it tore, because under it was a fury so long buried that it shook him to stand inside it. He looked at the drawings. He looked at the careful figure his 2-year-old had drawn over his murdered wife's cup, the figure he had thanked every night for 3 years for the cordial that was killing him. "She has been bringing me a draught," he said, very low, "every night. For my grief. I drink it so that I will sleep." He looked up, and his eyes were not a dying man's anymore. "My son has been trying to tell me who killed his mother for 3 years, and the only person who listened was the one woman in this palace I never thought to ask. Your son has been keeping you alive by staying silent, my king," I said. "And he has been dying a little every day to do it. He is 6 years old, and he has been guarding your wife's murder alone in the dark since he was 2. Because no one ever made it safe for him to speak. I would very much like to make it safe. But you have to let him be the one to do it, or it will not heal, it will only move from one keeper to another. That is the sick room the cold open promised you. We set it that very night, because a slow poisoner who senses the floor shifting becomes a fast one. And Halva was a hunter before he was a griever, and knew not to spook the prey. He let Audra come as she came every night, with the cup. He lay grey in the great bed, and played the wasting king one last time, and the household gathered as it had gathered for 3 years, and the physician sat down at the bedside with her gentle hands and the draught she had been killing him with, since before his son could talk. Einar's men were near. I was near, with the drawings, and in the doorway, because he had asked to be there, because I had promised him that this time being heard would be safe, and I had staked everything I had on making the promise true, stood the silent prince, looking at the cup. Audra lifted it to the king's lips. And the boy spoke. "That's the cup," he said. 3 years of silence. And the first words he gave the daylight world were those 3. The whole sick room froze. Audra's gentle hand stopped. And the child, shaking, 6 years old, pointed at the woman who had murdered his mother and kept him silent for half his life. And he said the rest of it, the thing he had been drawing in the dark for 3 years because he could not say it. "She put something in Mama's cup. I saw. She told me if I told, I'd have to drink one too." His small voice broke. "I didn't tell. For so long I didn't tell. But you have to not drink it, Papa, please. It's the same cup. I have seen many things in the Palace of the Iron Reach. I have never seen anything like the sound that 6-year-old Maid breaking 3 years of silence to save his father. And I hope never to need to again." Audra moved fast, because exposed killers do. She did not go for the king. The king was surrounded. She went for the witness, for the boy in the doorway, with the speed of a woman who has nothing left to protect, but the silence she has spent 3 years keeping. A thin blade out of her physician's sleeve aimed at the child who had finally found his voice. But I was already between them, because I had been putting myself between that boy and the dark for a year, and my body did it before my mind could vote, and the blade meant for a 6-year-old's throat went into my side instead. A bright cold line and a wash of heat. My blood coming down over the drawings scattered on the floor. Then Einar had her, and the king was up out of the bed he had been dying in, and the boy was screaming, and it was over. The realm shook, and it had every right to. A murdered queen is one thing. A murdered queen, and a king poisoned by inches for 3 years, and a child witness kept silent in plain sight. All of it the work of a beloved royal physician, who turned out to be an enemy faction's patient knife at the very heart of the throne. That is the kind of thing that rearranges every assumption a kingdom has ever made about where it is safe. Audra was given to the law, and the unravelling of her did not stop with the Luna's death. It ran back through years of careful poisonings, and forward through a faction's whole long design. And the realm learned, all at once, the cold lesson that the gentlest, most trusted hand in the house is the one that bears watching. Every great house that had grown comfortable with the slow grieving decline of the Iron Reach discovered there was suddenly a king again, recovering, furious, and asking questions no one had dared ask in 3 years. My side healed slow and left a long scar, and I find I do not mind it. It is the second best thing I ever earned in that palace. The best was 3 words from a child in a doorway, and I would take the scar 100 times for them. The king recovered. It is a strange thing to watch a man stop being poisoned. The colour comes back, and the weight, and the years fall off him, until you realise how much of what the court called grief had been Audra's draught, thinning him toward the grave. The grief was real too. But grief does not kill a strong wolf in 3 years. Poison does, and once it stopped, Halvar came back to the world, and to his son, and, slowly, carefully, the way you approach a wild, soft thing that has decided to come to you, to me. It is a year now, as I set this down, and the boy talks constantly. You would not believe a child could hold so many words for 3 years, and then spend them all at once. But he does, from morning to night, to everyone, as though making up for lost time on a schedule, and Halvar, who spent 3 years unable to reach his own son, listens to every single one of them with the face of a man who once thought he had lost that sound forever. The prince still draws. But the drawings are different now. They are full of light, and there are 3 figures in them, and one of them is always laying a fire. I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which I still cannot quite write without laughing, because I am the only queen in the territories who came to the throne off the night shift. Halvar did not court me the way kings court. He simply stopped letting me leave the room, moved his evenings to wherever I was working, the way his son once gave me his words in the dark. Two solemn people, learning slowly that the warmth was allowed. He grieves Leora still, and I would not have him do otherwise. She was bright and brave, and she died trying to save him. And the boy has her eyes. I am not her replacement. I am the one who finished what she started, who got the truth she died for out of the dark, and gave her son back his voice, and her husband back his life. There is room in a house for both a grief and a love. We have made the room. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire I no longer have to lay in secret, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to and always does, and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the night maid his son talked to for a year before anyone thought to mention her. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as grief, and that I now know is a healing man choosing a true word over an easy one. You write it as luck, he said, as though it were chance that the one person my son trusted happened to be the one person who would look at his drawings and understand. I have let it stand, because it is humbler than the truth, and you are humble to a fault. He set his hand over the scar on my side, the way he does. But I have thought about it for a year, and I will say it where you cannot unwrite it. It was not luck. My son did not speak to you because you were there in the dark. He spoke to you because you were the only person in this entire palace who wanted nothing from him, who did not need him to be the prince, or to be well, or to be over his mother, or to speak. Everyone else in his life, including his own father, came to him needing something, and he could feel it, and it kept him silent. You came needing nothing. You only listened. That is not luck, Vesna. That is the rarest thing in any kingdom, and it was sitting on my night shift for 4 years while healers and tutors and royals failed my son, because no one ever thinks to ask the person who wants nothing what they have heard. He almost smiled. So do not write that my son talked to you by chance. Write that a child who could not trust anyone who needed something from him found the one person in the realm who needed nothing, and that she turned out to be the one who could save us all. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think. He swears my son spoke to me because I wanted nothing from him, that it was my emptiness of any demand, and not mere chance, that earned his voice. But I have wondered, on the long nights, whether it was something simpler and sadder that I had buried my own children, and a grieving boy and a grieving woman recognized each other in the dark the way the bereaved always do, beneath all words. So did my son find his voice, because I asked nothing of him, or because we were both already broken in the same place, and he knew it. Did he choose me, or did our griefs find each other? Tell me your verdict below. I read every one, and so my husband has confessed. Does the king. And if you want to stay by the night fire with us a while longer, comment the drawings, and I will tell you next what happened when the realm learned how many other quiet, overlooked, unasked people had been holding truths in the dark all along, simply because no one ever thought to listen. So tonight, wherever you are listening from, find the person no one ever thinks to ask, and ask them. You have no idea what they have been holding in the dark, waiting all this time for someone who wanted nothing but to hear it. A whole kingdom nearly died because no one asked the night maid. Be the one who asks.